Every table saw should have a good solid outfeed table. That's what we're going to do today. And it's not just any table, it's a very simple table that can be built with a basic complement of tools. It's what I like to call a can-do project. Welcome to episode 30 of The Wood Whisperer. I'm your host, Mark Spagnolo, and on today's show, we're going to build a new outfeed table for the table saw. Now, I know you're probably thinking, hey, you already had one, why do you need a new one? Well, I actually had a chance to upgrade the fence system, and since the outfeed table was made specifically for the fence system that I had, it's not going to work on this new one. And just to show you real quick, it is the new Incra I believe it's a TSIII Tablesaw Fence System, and this thing is just a dream to use. I've wanted one for a long time and finally had the chance to get one, so I took advantage of it. Here it is, but unfortunately, no outfeed table, as you can see. So I have a few things to consider with this one. First of all, dust collection. I've got to make sure my dust collection gets where it needs to go. I also want to make this one a little bit wider, so I have more working space. I almost want to duplicate the surface area of the table saw once more behind the saw. And we've got a few specific things that we need to look at in terms of measurements that if you're building your outfeed table, what you might want to consider when you actually put those numbers to paper. So let's go ahead and take a look at those details. Now the first thing we're going to consider is the height. Obviously, if the height is off, this whole thing is shot. We need the pieces to flow smoothly off of our table and then onto the outfeed table. So what I like to do is take a measurement from the floor to the top of the table, and that is exactly 34 inches. Now if your table is not real level, you may want to check all sides, make sure everything is okay, but your reading should be 34, and if your table isn't level, it could cause some problems. So try to get your table level before you do this process. Okay, so we've got 34 inches here. That means that our outfeed table with our top, length of our legs, everything, when it's all said and done, can be no higher than 34 inches. And in fact, I'm going to aim for it to be at least 1/8 of an inch under 34 because I plan on using some adjustable feet. And I want a little bit of extra wiggle room there so that I can bring it up to the perfect height that'll make sense for this table. Also, keep in mind, depending on what type of leveling feet you use, there may be a certain amount of distance that these automatically add. This one looks like it's only going to add about a 1/16, maybe 3/32 of an inch to the height. So I'm going to make sure that I allow for the leveling feet when I calculate the length of my pieces. So now we need to look at the dimensions of the top. Width is really up to you. Some people like a really narrow table. If you've got enough room, to me, bigger is better because it's more work surface. But the thing I'm really concerned about is how far from the back of the saw out we should go. We have to have enough room to support the pieces that we're going to put on this thing. So let's think about it logically. Usually the longest piece that we're going to run across here would be, let's say, a 4x8 sheet of plywood. And the key is that once you go through the cut, you want to make sure that that piece doesn't have a tendency to tip forward. So if you're under 4 feet, that's exactly what's going to happen because the majority of the sheet's going to be hanging off of your outfeed table. So for me, the key is just at the point where my splitter starts, where you're past the blade, I want to make sure that I've got at least 4 feet from that point right there. And if I do that, basically the easiest way for me to do this is to measure from here to the end of the rail, which is about 10 inches. And I know I need at least 4 feet, so I'm going to say 48 inches minus this 10 inches. I know that I need my table to be at least right about here, 38 inches from front to back. Now there are a few other things to consider when you design your table. The biggest thing is obstacles. What do you have to maneuver around? What has to get around it? Especially if it's going to be a permanent fixture like mine is. If you're going to put it on wheels, that's another thing you have to be concerned about and how it's going to get around. For me, I have this big tube here for my dust collection system, and I need to make sure that that's not a problem for the setup. Secondly, I really want to have a shelf on this thing. I hate the fact that there's empty space under these outfeed tables and it's just wasted. You could really do something with that space. So I want to have a shelf that sits about maybe 12 to 16 inches off the ground. Obviously, if you look at this design of the dust collection system, my shelf needs to come above this pipe here, the flex tubing. So that shouldn't be a problem, but at least now you know why I made some of the decisions I did and what you might need to change about your design to make it fit your table saw and your dust collection system. Now, I don't know about you guys, but more often than not, I seem to be rushing my projects. There's always some scheduling issue, or I don't know, maybe it's just psychological. But either way, I wasn't anticipating this outfeed table project. So in an effort to make things go fast, yet not sacrifice quality, I'm trying to find a design that's very simple, but very sturdy and has all of the design elements that I need so that 6 months from now, I'm not thinking about building a new one. That's usually the goal. And if it lasts a couple years in my shop, then that's pretty good. So the design, it's imperative that it be very easy to build, but sturdy. Okay, and I actually was watching an episode of New Yankee Workshop recently, and Norm was building his assembly table, the current version of his assembly table. And his design was all out of 3/4 inch plywood, the legs, the stretchers, everything was 3/4 inch plywood, and it was all assembled with glue and screws. And I'm thinking, this is a perfect can-do project for the Wood Whisperer. This is a project that anybody can do. If you have a drill and a circular saw and a couple sheets of plywood, this is definitely a good project. The other thing is this table doesn't have to be an outfeed table. I mean, put some wheels on it, and this is a roll-around assembly table that's going to be great. And I mean, if you consider the amount of work that went into my other assembly table, the torsion box top, geez, this thing is, this can be done in a weekend. The other one is a week-long project, obviously, and it takes a little bit more in the way of tooling. So again, can-do project, and I want to hear some stories from you guys about this and see what modifications you make and where you can use this table in your shop. Now you're going to think I'm crazy, but I'm actually going to use some walnut veneered plywood for this project. I happen to have a decent amount of the stuff left over, lots of weird offcuts from a previous project, and honestly, it's more of a hassle for me to keep it around and wait for that perfect project than it is just to use it for something like this and clear out the shop and get ready for the new stuff. It's really a matter of efficiency. So shop projects are just a great time to use up all the scraps that really you just don't have a use for anywhere else. So most of my material is going to be this walnut, and I believe I've also got some birch that might wind up in the project. Now each one of our legs is composed of 2 pieces of 3/4 inch plywood, and they'll be butted up against each other with glue and screws in this sort of an L shape, like this. Okay, so if you cut these 2 pieces the same width, you're actually going to have one side longer than the other because, as you can see, one side adds in this extra piece of plywood, 3/4 of an inch or close to it. So what we're going to do is cut 4 leg pieces at 4 inches, and the other 4 leg pieces are going to be 3¼ inches. So each leg will be composed of those 2 different size pieces, so that when it's all said and done, it's going to look like 4 inches by 4 inches. Now I'm going to cut all of my plywood on the table saw today. So if you have a table saw, it's a great way to go. If you don't have a table saw, there are a number of other options that you can use. Okay, you could use a standard circular saw. I've got the Festool circular saw here. You could even go as far as using a jigsaw if you have a nice blade that's really sharp and has a lot of teeth per inch so you don't get the tear out on the plywood. The real key is not so much the cutting tool in this case, it's having a good reliable straight edge to run that cutting tool along with so that you have a good reference. Okay, you can go as low tech as one of these aluminum straight edges. These are really cheap from Home Depot and Lowe's. Even lower tech than that is a 2x4 that's been jointed on one side. Okay, you could even have if you have a nice 4-foot level, you could use that as something to ride your tools up against. You have got these fancier ones. This clamp and tool guide has a built-in clamping system. You just drop it across your workpiece, tighten it down, and have a nice reliable straight edge. And then, of course, one of my favorite ones is Festool straight edge, which is obviously best used with the Festool system. But this also will give you nice, accurate, straight line cuts. But again, today I'm using a table saw. All right, now this is a very easy project to assemble. In fact, the most complicated part of it is the assembly of the legs. And I'm going to show you how I plan to do that. There's a number of ways that you could do a standard plywood butt joint like this. And again, we're keeping it simple. You could have put a rabbet or a dado along here and join the legs in that way, but that's just too much work for what I'm trying to accomplish here. So, the butt joint, okay? You can use something like biscuits. You could use dominoes if you have the domino on hand. You can go as simple as brad nails and glue and call it a day. You know, for me personally, I want a little bit more help than that. I like the fact that I can use a biscuit or a domino, and these boards will be nice and aligned so that when I drive some screws through, I don't have the chance of them sort of being knocked out of registration. So that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to throw about 3 biscuits along the length and then 3 screws countersunk along the length.
With the narrow leg piece clamped to the table, I cut 3 biscuit slots into the side of the board. For the adjoining, wider leg pieces, I stand the boards on end with a second board behind them for extra support. Now this ensures a safer and more accurate cut. Next, I pre-drill for the screws. As with any project, I apply glue to the mating surfaces, the biscuit slots, and the biscuits. Assembling these pieces gets a whole lot easier if you use a piece of scrap to support the overhanging end. These square drive screws will not only add strength to the joint, but they also act as clamps while the glue dries.
And that, my friends, is what I call a quick and dirty leg. Okay, so now that all 4 of our legs are constructed, we could start to create sub-assemblies. It's much easier to assemble something of this size in portions as opposed to trying to get the whole thing done in one shot. Okay, so I've got 2 of my legs laying on the assembly table, and I've got side stretcher pieces cut. They're cut at about 38 inches. Okay, and I got 1 for the top and 1 for the bottom. Now, the bottom one is the support for our shelf, and of course that has to clear the dust collection, so that's how I got the height for that. And then the top one is actually pretty straightforward. I cut a little piece of the top material, 3/4 inch ply that I'm going to use for the top, and we want this stretcher to be exactly that distance, the thickness of this material, we want it to be exactly that distance from the top of the leg. So this little block here serves as a guide to let me know when I'm perfectly lined up. So I'm going to actually use that instead of doing measurements, just use the actual material. So glue, a couple brads to hold it in place, and then some screws to really lock it down.
The lower stretcher is attached the same way as the top. Make sure your shelf height is high enough for anything that might need to go under it. Same deal as before, glue, brads, and screws.
So now we have to attach our long stretchers, top and bottom. Okay, so I like to actually lay my sub-assembly down on the assembly table, and with glue, brads, and screws, just like every other piece that we're going to do on this outfeed table, we're going to attach this to the leg like so. It's a good idea, though, to have a square on hand, put that on the inside of the leg, and make sure everything is lined up properly. Now, I've moved the entire unit on the floor, resting on its side, so that I could access the other side easily. Now, of course, I would want to apply all my glue to all 4 sides before I do this for the final step, but this is sort of just a dry fit. Okay, now you're going to notice things are pretty wobbly at this point, and that's to be expected given the structure. As soon as this thing is put together and we put the top piece and the bottom shelf on it, that'll stiffen everything right up, and this will be very, very sturdy. All right, the basic structure is looking pretty good. My only concern at this point is over this span, we might get a little bit of a sag in the middle here over time. So it's probably not a bad idea for us to add some dividers in here and just basically suspend those in the middle. The easiest way to measure is not to take a measurement here at the center or mark our boards from what we see here, because as you can tell, there's quite a bit of flex in there. So the easiest thing and the most accurate way to do this is take our measurement here at the ends. because we know that that's not going to move. That's a restricted measurement. So once we get this thing to fit perfectly on the ends, we could put it in the center. And if the sides need to be pushed in a little bit or bowed out a little bit, that's fine, because we know what actually is happening is they're being straightened out. So we'll take that measurement from the sides and install a center support on the top and also one on the bottom. Now, attaching these center dividers may seem like a minor detail at first, but then if you're working by yourself, you start to realize that this isn't a perfect fit. We do need to apply pressure on both sides. How are we going to get this board locked into place? So for me, the easiest thing to do is get a clamp, run it pretty close to center, pretty close to where we're going to apply our board, and just start to apply just a little bit of pressure. Enough so that in order to get this board to slide in, we're going to need to kind of push it apart just a hair. And in fact, that was too much. So that I can apply some glue to the board, there we go, and pop it into place that way. And that'll kind of hold it. So once I have it in line with my hands, then I'll tighten the clamp down and come back with some brad nails, some screws, again, whatever your joinery choice is for this project. Okay, so I got the top cut, and now it's the moment of truth. See if I got it cut right the first time, because that would be nice. I think I got lucky. All right, so that's the top. Now the bottom, obviously given this structure, the bottom is going to be pretty much impossible to get a full sheet on, which is no big deal. It's just really for storage. So I'm going to do the bottom in 2 separate sheets. Now I'm going to secure the top just using a little bit of glue in a few different places. I want it to be, secure so it doesn't move, but at the same time, I want to be able to take it apart if I ever need to replace this top without doing a significant amount of damage. And I really don't want any screw heads on the top of this either that could eventually catch on pieces of material that are moving across the saw. So a little bit of strategically placed glue and we should be good to go. Now I have 2 different types of leveling feet here. One sort of goes in the corner, it's a corner bracket style, and the other hooks underneath one of the 4 legs. So I've got 2 of each. I'm just going to use them up because that's what I have in stock right now. But basically they just hook onto the bottom of the leg, screw into place, and that's really it.
Setting the final height is pretty easy. I place a long straight edge across both the saw and the outfeed table. I then sight down the straight edge and check to see how much adjustment is needed. Next, I make the necessary adjustments to all 4 legs so that the outfeed table is about a 1/16 of an inch below the surface of the table saw.
Now here's a detail I completely forgot about the first time I built an outfeed table. Had everything done, it looked beautiful, and went to use it for the first time with my miter gauge, and I was in for a surprise toward the end of my cut. Obviously, as things ride through the miter slot, they need to actually have a place to go, even after they're hanging off of the table saw. So typically what people do is they make a slightly wider space for this bar to go into, and it's very easy to make. You want to do one on both sides. The easiest thing to do, I find, is to just get a straight edge, a router, and a straight bit, and do it in 2 or 3 passes, whatever it takes, depending on the size router bit you have. There's no reason for it to be perfect because this table could, move one way or the other. So you want to make it slightly oversized to give you that extra bit of room. Now, from what I can see here, my table is a little bit further out than it might be for most people. So I'm looking at the clearance that I have here, and I think I might be okay with that for now. So if I don't have to put, strips in my top, I'd rather not, So if I can get away with not doing it, I'm going to try that. So I'm not going to do it, but definitely something to think about. Depending on how yours is set up, you may need to do that. Now I know it's just shop furniture, but there are a few things that you can do to make this piece look a little bit nicer. And sometimes it's just cool to have really cool looking shop furniture. What I like to do first of all is all of my holes that I created where I have screw holes, I like to plug those with a dowel. Okay, so I usually take some dowel material, I cut it into small little plugs on the bandsaw, and with a little bit of glue, tap them into place. And then once dry, I usually flush trim them smooth with a flush trim saw, and then sand flush. And we can also improve the look of the table by actually adding one more strip of ply across all of these recessed portions here. So by attaching that there, it gives the top a nice border all the way around, fills in this gap, and gives the front a much more finished look. Again, it's not necessary, but if you want to pretty it up a little bit, that's a good way to do it. Now, although I designed this table to be an outfeed table, as you can see, you can apply this to about 100 different things in the shop, whether it's a roll-around workstation or possibly even an assembly table. Whatever you want to do with it, the basic idea that I wanted to show you is that with a very simple and basic complement of tools, you can make a really rugged and sturdy table like this just using a couple sheets of plywood. All right, so how do we finish our outfeed table? Now for me personally, I've got a policy with shop furniture, and that's pretty much anything goes. So if you have a new finish that you want to experiment with, and you don't really want to do it on a fine piece of furniture, this is a great place to do it. Just slap it on there, get to feel the properties of the finish, learn a little bit more about it, and you'll be that much more prepared for your next project.
And here's a look at our finished outfeed table. It's sturdy and beautiful. The catalyzed lacquer finish will allow the boards to slide across the surface with ease. It's almost like it's saying, "Somebody feed me."
Now, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me at mark@thewoodwhisperer.com. Now, I'd like to take a minute to thank Incra for helping us out with the Tablesaw fence system. If you haven't seen Incra's stuff, go to incra.com and check it out. And I should probably also thank good old Norm for his help on this project. His assembly table was really the inspiration for the design, and I think it's a great design. I think it's something that can be applied all over the workshop and gives you a good idea of how a simple design can still be very rugged and have simple materials and be made with simple tools. So we'll see you next time on The Wood Whisperer. Thanks for watching.